Thanks for joining. This is Peter and Patrick, and we're chatting today about language industry growth. The industry it's interesting. I think it's a tale of two cities. I think from everything I read and from the conversations that I have with colleagues, there are some agencies that are growing. There's some agencies that are retreating, some agencies that are having a heck of a time with certain product lines and just killing it in other product lines. And I don't know that that's anything that's just isolated to translation. That's probably just a business thing. I don't know, Patrick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think something I find interesting is, throughout school and being in a language program and a translation program, you see all these pretty staggering stats about growth in the language industry, and just kind of at large too. You see that the need for language services is only going to keep increasing with how global and how connected everyone is becoming. Just kind of broader market impacts, and it's interesting to see kind of what that means when you put some numbers behind that and have some more finite data, which I know we're going to dig into.
Yeah, and I think I think every show, at least for the rest of this year, probably will have the letters AI in them at some point. But I feel like we may have reached like peak hysteria, and I'm going to define peak hysteria as being looking for that event that is the most nonsensical event. And I think I found it, Patrick. In one of the groups that I'm in, someone had said, hey, I'm giving a presentation to a university and it's a bunch of language students. Can someone help with some insight on AI and the impact of the industry? Because the professor called and said, I want to change the topic completely to, hey, can you help convince my students that they shouldn't abandon their translation aspirations because they all think they'll have no career in the industry? And I thought, okay, we have reached mass hysteria. I think we're there. I think we're there, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the example too of, whether it's robo advisors or chat traders for you or things like that. Like, sometimes it might work, but you probably still need a person if you want to achieve a certain level of quality or success or whatever word you want to put in the blank there. But I don't think you can just completely, like we've said a million times, just be like, here, AI, here's the thing, go do it. I'm not going to do anything to help or to train the loop or whatever it might be. Just kind of flipping that switch doesn't really have a noticeable impact.
I would agree, Patrick. I think we've talked about it a lot on the show, and I think others have probably read similar articles that, across the professional world, you're seeing glimmers of things that are really depressing. I think there was, I forget the name of the organization. Some organization just came out and said, hey, in our business, we foresee that we're going to reduce our headcount by 50% due to AI. And of course, those are the things that make people crazy, but it's probably a super specific business and what they do and what kind of activities. Translation, interpretation, voiceover, subtitling, all these things. There's different degrees of service. And I think it's like anything. It's like, hey, I'm going to paint my garage. All right, well, maybe I can slap some paint on the wall and I'm happy with it. Or, hey, I'm going to paint my living room that I have to look at every single day. I'm probably going to hire a pro, right? I mean, it's, guys, you can come up with really any industry and have this discussion, even in yours, right, Patrick? It's like,
yeah, I think it's
creation, right? It's like the same thing.
It's interesting. I think where you can see real strides in development of AI is if you find a very specific and specialized use case and make that work. Whereas, as we've talked about translation process and workflow on many of our shows, it's not just one thing. There's a lot of people who might work on a project. And so to just blanketly say like AI can do all your translation for you, I think is a little silly. But if you can find that one part and specialize it and train up that part of your workflow, I mean, you can keep doing that like one at a time and kind of maybe build to some sort of better automated solution. But I think in the near term, you really do have to kind of take baby steps and see what's useful, and is the juice worth the squeeze on some of these things that like look phenomenal. And then you're like, okay, but how do I keep doing that, and what impact is that going to have on me on my day-to-day work is really a bigger question.
Absolutely. 100%. Nailed that, Patrick. All right, well, let's jump into the story. And we're going to hit AI again. We'll have that conversation even a little bit more in detail, but very proud of the fact that Argo Translation has made the Inc. 5000 list. I was joking and said that I have a feeling, I can't say for sure, there's 5,000 companies. I didn't look at each one. But I have a feeling that we're probably one of the oldest first-time nominees, coming in at a spry 30th year of business, hitting the Inc. 5000. It's pretty exciting. It goes right along with what I always say. I feel like we're the world's oldest startup. We're very much in growth mode and have been in the last few years. And I know one of the things that we talked about in show notes is like, so what is the Inc. 5000? I don't think everybody knows. And the Inc. 5000 is essentially, it's Incorporated Magazine, Inc. Period Magazine, which is a business publication, tracks the 5,000 fastest growing privately held organizations. And it is basically calculated on 3-year growth. What is the 3-year growth of the company in revenue? And it just takes that and says, all right, what are the top 5,000? And we were fortunate enough to make the list. I think we were, like 3,000 something, right? I don't have that number memorized.
Yes,
3,328.
Yep, I got the list up.
3,328. So we weren't 5,000th. So that's a good thing.
Hey, you know what they call the person at the bottom of the class of med school, right?
A doctor.
Doctor.
Absolutely. So it still counts. And it's interesting, right, Patrick? I mean, I feel like translation was pretty well represented. What a handful of companies there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me too, like kind of all the qualifiers that are put behind this. You mentioned one of being privately held. Another one is they don't give you revenue numbers; they give you percentages of growth, which I know is very important for certain private companies to not like have their revenue outlook out there necessarily and hard numbers. So I think percentages is an interesting way of looking at it. And companies also have to be a certain size. I think looking at our notes here, it says in 2020, they need to have a minimum of 100,000 in revenue. And by 2023, it needs to be a minimum of 2 million. So this isn't necessarily, a flash in the pan type of thing. Like you said, it's also over a 3-year period. So it kind of shows that sustained growth over a couple of years as opposed to maybe a blip on the radar.
I like it. And of course, I think that it's, like any of these things, does it, what does it say about the company? And I think it's, keeping it simple. As they've had good growth over the last 3 years. I don't, I'm not bold enough to say that it says that, you do something better or you have better, I think it just means you have some success in marketing the firm and growing. I know one of the things we've always excelled at is retaining our customers over time. And I think that that's, I just had a conversation with a client before jumping on, and it's been 24 years that we've been working with this one specific client. So for us, at least, I think the acquisitions have been a big driver. I can't say for the other agencies, the translation agencies. I do know, I think PGLS has done like 3 or 4 acquisitions. I know they're a big government provider. So I know some of these names, Proprio, Boostlingo, they're big in interpretation. I know interpretation is going crazy right now. So you can kind of see some of the trends.
Yeah, I find it interesting because looking at the list, I see a lot between the 3-year growth kind of trending between, I would say like 90 to 200% is where the bulk of them. So close to 1 or 2xing the business over those years. But when you get to the top of the list, that's to me what's fascinating is over a 3-year period. I mean, there's one that's 592%, 751%, and 1,667. So like those are pretty staggering numbers. Not to diminish anything of anyone in the 91 to 200%. That's still very, very, very good. But those top 3 numbers are pretty eye popping. And like you said, it could be acquisitions, but that's my question when I see those is, okay, what's the secret sauce here, and how is that happening?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Patrick. There's, industry trends here. There's, acquisitions, because even, it doesn't, the numbers don't necessarily, those percentage growths don't necessarily have that. I mean, if, a company gets funding and they, go out and buy three companies in a year, well, that'll be ridiculous growth, right? So it doesn't have that, but either way, it's growth, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what they're trying to measure. Then success, they've done it. So, um,
That's another thing I think that isn't reported necessarily, is this is all top line revenue, and
mhm.
what isn't necessarily reflected is if any of the businesses are profitable or if they're bleeding money. So it, again, not to take away anything from anyone on the list, but usually when I read these, I usually have more questions than answers when I see the data come out.
Absolutely. And, sometimes a staggering number, like what we see for the number one candidate, you say, wow, that's pretty meteoric. I can't even say that word. They're rising
Meteoric.
like meteoric. Thank you very much, Patrick. Um, so will they be here in a year or two? Will they be on the list again? Obviously they were on the list in 2023. So, what kind of staying power will any of us have that are on the list? I mean,
That's a fair point too, because I know now, with Argo making the list, the three places I've worked at various times have all made the Inc. 5000 list, and it's interesting at what point, like you said, of the company history that companies end up on that list. Is it in the middle of the company? Is it at the beginning? Is it at the end? And I think being in that 90 to 200% growth rate, to me, and staying on the list really does signal that you're probably profitable, because something's going right to keep that growth going and fueling that growth. But it's not as astronomical as like, holy cow, you're 16 times bigger than you were 3 years ago. That's a little bit insane. Um, so yeah, I think what's cool too is they usually will also, with the current year's ranking, we'll put, where that company might have been in 2023, which is pretty cool. I see there's some in that 90 to 200 spot that we mentioned. I think there's three or four that were in that range before, and then there's, I think, five or six new companies to the list, which is pretty exciting too.
absolutely. And you're seeing more of these kind of things in the industry. We often talk about Slater. We've talked about NIMSY a little bit and Common Sense Advisory, but they all put out similar lists. The way that those go, more or less, is they'll say, "Oh, what are the top 100 agencies, translation agencies?" Very much focused on, those companies are uh, they do news or research or M&A activity specific to the translation industry. So they focus on that. So they'll do that top 100 list or top 200 list of translation agencies, and they have kind of classes to sort of separate out like the monsters, the publicly traded companies, and we fall under the boutique category. And so they do some ranking on the larger list as well as on within your category, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting, and we've been fortunate enough to be to make it on those lists as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that's kind of sort of interesting is my number of emails that I receive from PE firms looking to buy a translation agency has quadrupled. So thank you, Inc. Magazine, for that. But we are not looking to sell; we're looking to acquire. So I've had some nice conversations that started with sell and ended with, hey, we're looking to buy. So if you
Mm-hmm.
know anyone on that side of the coin. So
I am interested for this one, Peter. How does Inc. gather the data? Right, they're not just doing this by themselves, right? You applied for this, I assume. Like, how does that process work?
yeah. They if you've ever applied in the past, they send out an email, and I had applied in previous years and hadn't made it. So we applied this year, and you can't just make it up. You have to submit your returns to show that you have that number. So you calculate where your revenue was for those 3 years. It's kind of an intake process, and you submit your tax return for the organization so you can see that top line sales number. And there's verification essentially to it. of course, someone asked me, what about the people that don't apply? Well, I'm sure there's some people that don't apply and may have bigger growth and they just don't apply. That's
Mm-hmm.
certainly always a thing. But yeah, they don't, because they're privately held. It's not like they can go to some resource and gather the information. So it's self-reporting with verification.
Right. I mean, I view it too as kind of like you see all the like top workplace nominations and things like that. Like, we'll take the Chicago Tribune, for example. They don't just pick who they want to. The like, companies get surveys for that. They fill out and they gather all this data. So it's not like the company who's putting out the data doesn't, like you said, doesn't just make this up. Like, there's a rigorous intake process to be able to make the list.
Yeah, I love that, Patrick. That's such a good point because I had a friend of mine once who was sort of uh, downgrading the best place to work numbers or awards. And I said, no, you don't understand. Yes, the employer applies, but then
Every
they
single person who works there gets the survey. We apply for those where I work, and we are fortunate enough to win a bunch of them. But everyone gets a survey, and everyone gets multiple reminders to go fill it out.
absolutely. So it's not that, I mean, that would be one hell of a conspiracy if someone it's like, all right, all 100 employees, you're going to say how awesome this place is, or you get 50 lashes. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, right? I mean, as I recall, those surveys are anonymous as well.
Mm-hmm.
That information is not shared with the employer, so
Correct.
it's not that someone would have, the ability to go, "Hey, Patrick, I see how you answered that." I mean, that's not how it goes. So it's
Right.
I mean, yeah, you have to apply, but you still have to qualify. So, and I would
Mm-hmm.
say the same with this ink list. I do think we're going to see more consolidation. I think that this list shows that again there are some agencies that are having some success in the domains that they're in, and it's no surprise that I've been getting 3 to 4 emails a day inquiring because people are looking for that growth, right? They're looking for companies that are established and can hopefully provide a springboard to their earnings, right?
Yeah, I'm interested what you think too. Another cool thing that they list out is they list a core business or core industry. And looking at the list, we're looking at Slater because they write up a nice summary about this for how this applies to the language industry. And I see a lot that are diversified LSP, language service provider, but I only see, I think, 2 that have technology in them. So I'm curious if you think that will show up in the future, or if that's the publicly traded behemoths that own all the technology. Do you see technology seeping in a bit more in the future on this list?
I do, especially in certain spots. Like it's interesting to see Boost Lingo there because they are kind of more of a straight technology play. They provide a platform to companies like ours that are trying to provide interpretation services to corporations. Now, they will provide interpretation as well, but their main drive is the technology itself. I think, I already see it bleeding with us, and I would imagine, there's certainly firms larger than us that have more ability to invest revenue. But, I know as of this time next year, the conversation for us is going to be very different. I would start to throw us into that mix of technology. Now, the difference is we'll have a lot of our own technology, but for our own use. We're not actually going to sell the tech. The tech is going to be for the benefit of our clients. And, we already have some of that with homegrown connectors, with basically a custom ERP system to run our business and soon a custom TMS. It's going to be interesting. I think that line's going to bleed. It's going to be interesting.
That's an interesting point too, is I know the initial plan is to keep it all in house, but if you find a case for it and that's on the product roadmap, like that could be interesting to monetize that outside of the 4 walls of Argo. Like that would be an interesting play too. And who knows if that's going to be the case. Like it's hard to tell what the future holds, but I think what you're describing too is really like finding that one thing, like we mentioned earlier, and like really focusing and investing in that and making that no longer an issue for any workflow that you're running. So you can then focus on the next problem and just like really making sure and focusing on that one thing, like I said, in the process, like you mentioned, a custom TMS, that can just make everything else so much easier.
I mean, it's amazing. We're knee deep in this project right now, and some of the things that come out of it. If you think last year we focused on the customer portal, so it was the other side of that coin. This year we're focusing on our relationship with our vendors, our translators. So it's the service side of the portal. And what's interesting about that is like some of the projects that are springing out of that are, oh, how do we send POs to our vendors? Oh, well, how do we do their invoices? Oh, wouldn't it make sense that if we're showing them all their purchase orders, that instead of collecting an invoice, they could essentially just log in and choose the projects they've done? And heck, we have to do it. Most of the large corporations we work with, they don't have an invoicing procedure. Their invoicing procedure is log into Ariba or
Yep.
Talia or one of those systems, go click on the PO and say, yeah, I'm submitting an invoice for X amount. Here's my PO number. That's it. That's your invoice. Certainly have an invoice internally for your own billing systems, but they're not interested in that. We've already given you, the client's given you approval. You have the ability to bill against this purchase order. You just have to give a few fields of information and you're done. And we were saying, hey, why can't we do the same thing? So it's interesting. That's what we're working on. And we're really, really in the weeds on segmentation and some of the other really heavy topics like file parsing and file delivery, and can two translators work in the same file at the same time, and all really, really heavy tech discussions, but thankful for it, for sure.
If you don't have a project code name yet, I suggest Project Whack-A-Mole, because it sounds like once you solve one thing, you think of two more things that you can solve. So that's my take from being very far on the outside of that project.
It's a big project. There's a lot. There's a lot involved, and the stakes are high. But we're excited to pursue it. So yeah, that'll be the really interesting. And to go back to your question, yeah, I think that you're going to see the line being smudged on what is a technology company and what is a language service provider, because I think a lot of other agencies are cooking their own tech.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that forever with SDL, right? Like they own Trados or whatever it's called now, and they've been selling that as a product in addition to being a language service provider. So like it's not necessarily earth-shattering breaking news in the industry. Like it's been happening.
No,
but I'm curious to see how many people might pull away from something like that. Of like, hey, I don't want SDL to own my translation memories, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, this is an old story. A lot of the tool providers have been purchased by the behemoths. In fact, our own WordBeat was purchased by TransPerfect. So, at a certain point, an agency has to make a decision and say, well, how do we want to do this? Do we want to continue where we adapt a tool and make it our own and write integrations to it? And, it's now owned by a competitor, which is really, really tough. And I think there's going to be more and more consolidation. And, I think getting back to the AI question, that's where I see the impact, is that for those in the industry who are not ready to face, I don't know if I want to, I'm not going to call it a threat. I'm going to say the opportunity of AI and how to do it, I think they'll die a slow death.
Yeah, I mean, we've equated it too, right, to when translation memory technology first came out, right? Like most translation before that was probably done with pen and paper, or typing in separate Word docs or whatever it might have been at the time. And it's, I'm sure people at the time were like, well, the machine can't replace me, type of deal. And again, similar thought here, where it's like, okay, the machine's probably not going to replace you, but how do you work with that machine to keep yourself in business?
Absolutely. How to use the technology to amplify what you're doing and not contract it. And I think the agencies that are looking for those opportunities are the ones that are going to flourish. Again, I think I've shared that, our AI enabled workflows have been growing like gangbusters. Still always a human in the loop. So I would tell you that overall it's had a positive impact on revenue and not a negative impact. I think some people think that that automatically means a negative impact, and I don't think so at all. In fact, I think that some projects that we would have lost had we not been able to provide multiple flavors or multiple service levels, with a lower cost alternative, would have been lost.
Yeah, and I mean we've talked about too the three big pillars are cost, quality, and speed, and I think speed is ripe for projects to move faster and output to be quicker, but it's at what cost? Of what else? You can't necessarily have all three be fantastic on every project. One of them or two even have to give for the one to be at the point where you need it to. So it's really that balancing act, and as the buyer, really clearly communicating what's most important of those three things. And if it's all three, like that's where you find the Cadillac providers that charge a lot and take more time, and they really have a good output. But if you need something quick, there's a place in the market for that.
Absolutely. So I think that's probably going to be the big story if we're sitting here next year and we're fortunate enough to make the list again. I think we'll be talking about AI and the impact it's had on the business, and what pockets were mostly affected, and what does that look like moving forward. I think we're at the peak of the hysteria, and I think people are starting to settle in and figure out, all right, well, how does this assist me in business, and how do I retain all my good talent, and still keep them in the loop and keep them engaged with good work. And I think we've been able to manage that thus far.
Yeah, I mean, I just had the thought too of just kind of even reminding myself of like how AI isn't necessarily new either. Like how long ago was the Watson Jeopardy tournament where they had AI compete against people 10, 15 years ago at this point?
Yeah.
So again, I think it's what's really, like you said, there's a lot of hype around it, but I'd be curious to see like they're probably not sexy, but use cases that like actually save people a ton of time or money or whatever they're looking to save on.
For sure. I think I've seen, I've been getting, circulars from different universities that are offering classes on maximizing AI strategy. There's been webinars and workshops in all of our professional groups of people trying to demystify. And I think that's really the key, is demystify the AI. It's been out there for a long time, and this is not really something that's new.
Yeah, I mean, something super boring that we use, and that's what I think could add a lot of value. It's like find boring stuff that you don't like doing and try and have AI do that, because then you can focus on what you like doing. But for example, like taking meeting transcripts and being like, tell me the action items from the call. You don't have to think about it. You dump it in a chat and it will pick out the action items from the transcript. Super easy, super light lift. And usually the output is pretty good. It's probably not perfect, but at least then that will jog your memory, as opposed to say it's a 30-minute meeting. You don't have time to read a 30-page transcript about what you talked about.
Love that. Those kind of uses, I think, for the technology are phenomenal. It's when we lean on them too hard and there's no human intervention, I think. The complexity of the task obviously bears a lot, and like transcription and trying to find a brief version of a 30-page transcript, summary, if you will. Those are great uses for the technology. That's all very linear. So, yeah. So, Patrick, I think we're at that point in the episode where we think of a wrap up. What is or a takeaway? What is your big takeaway from today?
Yeah, I would say it's really cool to see how much the language industry is growing as a whole. Again, I know there's all sorts of qualifiers to be able to make the ink list, and like you said, there's companies that don't apply. But it's really cool to see kind of the strength of the industry, and how much this really validates that the need is there for language services. So it's really cool to see that with some data behind it.
Absolutely. For me, the big takeaway is a little self-serving. Maybe I just think persistence pays. It took us 30 years to get here, and I couldn't be more proud of our team and all the impact that people have had over the years on what we've done. and what we hope to do moving forward. And yeah, just very, very thankful for the recognition. I got a lot of very kind comments on LinkedIn from a post we did about it. And I just hope the next 10, 20, 30 years can be just as successful. So it'll be someone else, Patrick, probably in 30 years. It'll probably be Mike and Kimberly or something. Probably won't be me. But at any rate, for this episode of Translation Confidential, thanks for joining, Peter and Patrick.